It's happy to see you all, although I can't see you, but I'm happy you're here. So I'm talking on a book of Kadgiri Roshi, edited by Steve Hagen, called, you have to say something, and the chapter I'm talking from is called Opening Your Heart. For anyone living a spiritual life, the most important practice is open-heartedness. But dealing with life with compassion and kindness is not easy. We tend to live in terms of me, quotation marks. But if you're interested in the spiritual life, you will have to consider more than just yourself. So let's just look at this first paragraph for a second. For anyone living a spiritual life, and I think that includes anybody that's in this room and anyone that's watching on Zoom, you wouldn't be here if you're not interested in living a spiritual life. And then Kadgiri Roshi says, the most important practice is open-heartedness. And you notice he says, most important practice. So this open-heartedness isn't like something we're just naturally born with, and we just keep cultivating it and cultivating it. If we observe children, young children, you know, they do seem very open-hearted most of the time. But something changes, and we begin to kind of close in a little bit on ourselves and others. So I'm sure Kadgiri Roshi might say in other places that, oh, the most important practice is Zazen, something like that, or something else. But he does say here the most important practice is open-heartedness. So really, that's at the bottom of this practice, I believe, that we do. So it's a practice also means meeting conditions that are difficult and challenging. That's how we open ourselves up. If we just stay in a place where everything's comfortable, we probably won't grow. It's through this meeting the difficulties, the challenges, things that make us angry, confused. That's how we grow. And our hearts become more open. And he says, but dealing with this compassion and kindness is not easy. So yeah, it's not easy all the time. We have to go to places that make us uncomfortable. We tend to live in terms of me. But if you are interested in spiritual life, you will have to consider more than just yourself. I'm a member of an organization called SCBA, and I'm actually on the board of it. And one of the strong practices now of that organization, it's a national organization of Soto Zen priests, about 300. And one of the things we're looking at more and more closely is the situation of kind of white privilege. I think you've heard of this term. And acknowledging, that, people of color have not been treated equally in our culture here. So there's a lot to look into that. And I would say it's not easy. It's not easy for me to just open up to all the pain. I kind of want to just stay at Hokyoji, out in rural. Doesn't matter. Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Iowa, like Steve said. You can go 2 miles in any direction and be in either one of those 3 states. But it seems necessary for me to grow in my practice that I have to go someplace that I never even knew was there. A place of pain for many, many, many people. And then I'm not reading every word, every sentence, but I'm picking out some sentences. Then he says, but very few of us actually practice it in our daily lives. And I can understand what he's saying. Yeah, probably the vast majority of people in our culture, and maybe lots of cultures, don't practice that kind of way. It's like, how can I take care of myself? How can I just, look at my own personal circumstances and make them better? Well, however, I think at least the more open-hearted I become, the more I see there is really open-heartedness out there. This morning I was having a talk with John. I'm staying with John. And he gets coffee, a latte every morning at this particular place. It's a few blocks away from his house. And he was telling me that it's this man born in Turkey. He came here when he was 22 years old. And he says that place is, really thriving business because of this particular person who's just kind of really open with everybody. So that struck me. We see it. It's out there. It's not just with Zen Buddhists, Even you can tell it when you're checking out with your groceries. Some people are just really, some of those cashiers are just really open with you. I know they're trained to be, at least where I go shopping, but some of it is just genuine. So I try to be as open as I can to. If they say, have a good day, I'll say, you too. You too. And then you usually say, thank you. But even one person practicing love and compassion is a great source of peace in this world. Once I was in 1981, I was traveling in India, and I worked at Mother Teresa's. I had been not a nurse, but a nursing assistant. So I volunteered to work at one of her missions for 2 weeks. And for some reason on Christmas Day, I don't know why I was thinking this, but on Christmas Day, I went to her main place. and just was, I think it was that day that I was going to go start working. And so I was just kind of checking in. And one of the nuns greeted me. And I said, well, I'm going to start working. And then she said, would you like to meet Mother? This is Christmas Day. And she wasn't like just world famous at that time, although quite famous. And I would say it was because of my non-open heart that I basically said, oh, no, don't bother her, that kind of thing. But when I think back, just think, it's Christmas Day, this person's showing up, and the nun just said, would you like to meet her? It's like she would have come down and met me. Maybe only for 10, 15 seconds, but still, she'd take that time out of her life to do that. That's really open-heartedness. Yet I couldn't receive it. It was too open for me. Perfect openness of heart brings into life flexibility, tenderness, and magnanimity. This can't be fully explained conceptually. You can't put your finger on it, but you can feel it. To live this way is what you're really looking for. Kagyu Roshi often makes these statements that we don't really know what we're doing in this practice. It's not like perfectly clear, but we have an idea, we can get a taste of it. And in his first book that was published, Returning to Silence, he says, the sitting in Zazen silently is what you're really looking for, only if you can see it dimly. I always love that line. So it brings into life flexibility, tenderness, and magnanimity. So it's not like we're living in a rigid way. One Zen koan story goes like this. A student approached his teacher when he was clearly near the very end of his death or life, and asked him, what's the teachings of an entire lifetime? What's the teaching of an entire lifetime? And the teacher responded, an appropriate response. Now, in my younger days, I might have been pretty disappointed by that kind of an answer. Thinking an appropriate response, now I want some kind of what's the teaching? It's like, appropriate response. What are you talking about? But really, if we contemplate that, just think, if we were going through all of our life and at every moment, wherever we go, whoever we meet, whatever condition that arises, we just respond appropriately. That's quite a thing to aspire to. Flexibility, tenderness, magnanimity. Usually we live our lives only in terms of the world we can see. When we do, we emphasize ourselves. We place the I first. Even when we take up the spiritual life, we place the I first. So that's really true. I mean, if I do look at my life now, and if I looked at it in 1974 when I first started doing this practice, or even way later than 1974, 1984, 1994, I see I was something totally different than what I am now. Not that, I've made a whole lot of progress, but I can look back and I can see something that was really just interested in me through all this Zen practice, getting into fights with people, maybe not too much, really, well, no fist fights, let's put it that way. And just a little verbal stuff, not shouting matches, but the thinking, the thinking. So yes, this is what we're really looking for. How can we be at peace, at ease with all of the circumstances that arise in this very complicated world? Okay. He says, we never forget ourselves. That is why at bottom, we're often irritated or uneasy. And the more we place the I first, the more irritation, uneasiness, suffering, and fear we feel. Sometimes I think about dying these days. I've always thought about it, but maybe I'm thinking about it a little more lately. But sometimes I get a little kind of twinge in my stomach when I think about it, dying. Then I think, well, which actually is connected with a little bit of fear. Then I think that's just me thinking. It's just me thinking, putting myself out there first. What we tend to ignore is the world that sees us. It is actually the world as it is before you are conscious of it, before you form some idea about it. If you emphasize yourself, you will completely forget this world that sees, holds, and sustains you. And I would add that also corrects and admonishes you. If we're really looking at the whole picture, we can be informed about how we need to adjust. What our thinking, our actions, our speech. We all have memories and habits and patterns in our lives. And sometimes, even though we feel good, they don't allow us to open our hearts. Intellectually, we know we should, but emotionally, it seems like we can't. Still, you can do it. Strictly speaking, openness of heart is beyond all speculation. It is the total picture of your life as you live it from day to day. So yes, we have these memories and habits, like just these conditions that are deeply formed in our bodies and minds. And that's what I was talking before about. We need to step outside of box that we're formed in. I don't know if you still do this, but I was impressed when you had a shake it up day. Do you still do that, or has it been a while? Maybe COVID kind of, yeah, but that's really a good idea. Shake it up. What do we need to do that we haven't been doing? Or what have we been doing that hasn't been working well? Something like that. That reminds me of a passage I read in the Nikayas where the Buddha talks about making right effort. And I was very, oh boy, okay, I'm going to get this now. He's going to explain what right effort is. So, but wouldn't you know it, usually when you read these passages, somehow he doesn't really satisfy you completely. But I'll tell you what he said. And I actually now find it very satisfying. He says, you know those things that you are doing that are good for you to do? Continue to do those things. So, great, thank you. Then he says, do you know those things that are not good for you to do that you are doing? Stop doing those things. And then he says, do you know the things that would be good for you to do that you're not doing? Start doing those things. And then he says, you know those things that would not be good for you to do that you're not doing? Don't start doing those things. That's his whole deal about right effort. But you can take that all the way out. Sometimes I think about, how about doing that kind of practice when you're doing Zazen? We kind of know things we can do while we're sitting Zazen that they aren't helpful. So when we recognize that, why don't we just stop doing that? Kind of imagining things. Yeah, memories and habits and patterns, yeah. Just the, both the accumulated and inherited and that we have that are pretty deep, go very deep inside. Quite hard to break those patterns. But we can. You must practice patience. Oh, excuse me. That's my last paragraph. I'm going out of the order of your book, Steve. Changing the order, shaking it up. I'm coming back to that. It says, compassion is like spring water under the ground. Your life is like a pipe that can tap into the underground spring. When you tap into it, the water immediately comes up. So drive your pipe into the ground. Tap into the water of compassion. We can't conceive of what real compassion and openness of heart are. But if you tap into them, you can feel them. If you learn to deal with your life with compassion, magnanimity, and flexibility, you will become very tender, generous, and kind. So we don't have to worry about becoming burnt out because there's an endless source of energy coming up. He uses the metaphor of spring water. We have a spring at Hokyoji. For the 40 years I been around there, it still just bubbles up. Except just a few months ago, we made a pond. We've been doing our next door neighbor is like a super duper guy who can run all kinds of big equipment. And he made a little pond. I thought, you guys want a little pond? I said, oh, sure. So he made a little pond. So he does now address kind of the other side of we can't just keep extending ourselves for the benefit of all beings and forgetting about our own welfare. So he says, we can all practice forgetting ourselves. Forgetting yourself does not mean destroying yourself. Forgetting yourself is just to see yourself from a different angle, the way the world sees you. Then you will not just see your little ego self, but your true self, your big self, which includes all beings. So including all beings even means things that are not even animate. For instance, Mr. Rock. We take care of Mr. Stone, Ms. Stone. Recently, we had a retreat at Hokyoji with guest speakers, and one person told the story who had spent some time practicing with Thich Nhat Hanh about this little anecdote about going through a door, opening and closing a door. Maybe some of you have heard it. But apparently when Thich Nhat Hanh was a very young monk, his teacher asked him to, please, will you get me something or another? I don't know what it was. But Thich Nhat Hanh, in kind of an anxious state, being very eager to please his teacher, sort of, yes, and he kind of went out through the door, you know, kind of not paying attention to George, opening and close it really fast. He said, I don't know what, you know, I'm making this up. But the teacher then said, Tick, I don't know what the, you know, what the name, the right name is, but please come back here. So he came back and says, please go through that door again and be mindful of going through that door. And Thich Nhat Hanh told the story that he never forgot that. So that's part of his practice. And since I heard that, it was only a few weeks ago, I'm trying to do that practice myself. Every time you walk through a doorway, just bring your mind there, bring your body, your mind there, and just really pay attention to how you open this door, walk through it, and close by. It's kind of like a mini mindfulness moment that just brings you back. So far, I'm doing pretty good. You know, maybe 1 out of 100 times I actually pay attention to what I'm doing. But we usually imagine a doorway as something that's in our way or blocking our way to get through something. There's a sutra, can't remember if it's Sandokai or Hokyozanmai, that says, if you imagine mountains and rivers to block your way, you will never find, you know, where you're going. In other words, we have this idea that mountains and rivers are obstacles, but also that's a simile or a metaphor for anything that we feel is in our way or getting in our way. It could be an argument with somebody, or us getting angry at something, just something that feels like it's in my way, it shouldn't be happening. This pandemic should not be happening. It's the same for all of our activity. Whether we're cooking, how we handle the pots and pans, washing dishes, or we clanging them around, trying to just get through the job, get it done. Now I'm going to circle back. You must practice patience, calmness of mind, and mindfulness. If you don't confine yourself to just your own view of these things come up naturally. When you just sit down in Zazen, you can feel something. Even if you don't know what it is, it just arises right here, right now. So I'm going to now move to actually another chapter where he talks about this Zazen, just for a couple paragraphs, and then I'll almost be done. So I do believe that doing this Zazen practice is really a concrete way by which we can open ourselves up. It can't be only Zazen. Like Dogen says, Zazen has nothing to do with sitting or lying down. The lying down part means, well, taking a nap, or it means all the activity that we do in the daily life. It's not separated. Elsewhere, I think it's in Returning to Silence, Karigiri Roshi says, what does he say? Oh, it's not, Zazen is not an exclusive activity. To merge with Zazen is not so easy. It requires strong determination. In other words, you have to completely throw yourself away in Zazen. Dogen tells us to throw away good and bad, right and wrong, to have no designs on becoming awakened or becoming a Buddha. When you become one with Zazen, through and through, there is no attachment. This is peaceful, harmonious mind. This must be your aim. Otherwise, you won't experience Zazen as it really is. Of course, many things and ideas come up in Zazen, but those things are just like bubbles. The moment you meddle with them, you immediately provoke a sense of irritation, hatred, depression, and so forth. Oneness with Zazen implies no meddling. It means no idea of practice and no idea of practicer. And it also means no idea of me doing Zazen. We need to aim for that. How do we sit Zazen in a way in which Zazen drops off, I drop off, everything drops away. This is really becoming open-hearted, where there's no self here. There's always a self, and I'm not saying no, but there's no abiding self. But it's something that can respond appropriately to the world, any condition that arises. So here's my ultimate conclusion. Yeah, before when I've talked a couple of times over the 20 years. Was it 20 years ago? I was checking the copyright, and I think it was almost exactly 20 years ago that this book was published. You probably 98? Okay, I don't remember. So that means more than 20 years ago. Yeah, okay, maybe that's right. Yeah, you probably no. Yeah, so yeah, this book has been out for 23 years, something like that, or yeah. And So I've talked a couple times or three, I don't know, on this chapter over those years. But one part I've always left out was this, and I'd like to read it this time. This is Kadgir Roshi speaking. When I was 14 years old, my mother died. The world seemed completely dark. I felt there was no hope for me. Day after day, I cried in my bed. It seemed that the more I cried, the more I tried to reach for her, the further from me she became. So I cried even more. I cried constantly. But all of a sudden, I stopped crying. I felt my mother had come into my heart. I can't explain it in words, but there was no longer any separation between me and my mother. This goes for you too. There is you, and then there is you, and then there is the world. If there is even a small gap between them, we fill it with thought. As long as we create this gap, we will never understand. But in truth, there is no gap between you and the world. This is openness of heart. This is why we do Zazen. That's all I have to say. Okay, time's up. Well, thank you very much for your kind attention.